and welcome back to the Young Just Us podcast. My name is Roman, and I'm doing an issue-by-issue deep dive into the 1998 run of DC Comics' Young Justice. Welcome back, and apologies, this episode is coming out a little bit late, but strap in because it's going to be a long one, so hopefully it's worth it. I'm going over both issues of JLA World Without Grown-Ups today, which are both 50-page comics. Oh my god, who let me do this? This is the other main prequel story for Young Justice, and can I just say that I wish comics were organized better, particularly on DC Universe Infinite, because I had no idea that these even existed until I was like halfway done with Young Justice. They reference the events of the story in Young Justice occasionally, but I don't remember seeing an editor's note directing the reader to World Without Grown-Ups. I could be wrong though. But regardless, I feel like all prequels and stories related to a given series should be in that series collection, like in an other stories featuring Young Justice section or something. But on that note, the other day I reblogged an amazing reading guide for Young Justice 1998 on the podcast Tumblr, so definitely go check that out. That guide was made by @TimBartism on Tumblr or @TFemRedTodd on Twitter. Thank you so much. What would we do without reading guides, honestly, in DC fandom? But yeah, there were honestly a couple of things that even I hadn't heard of on there. Gosh, it's really turtles all the way down sometimes with comics. But yeah, for anyone wondering, I'm not doing like every single comic that ever mentions Young Justice members, especially pre-issue 1 of Young Justice, just because it's a little bit tedious, and honestly most of those don't really have a ton to do plot-wise with Young Justice. But if there's any demand for deep dives on those comics, I'm definitely open to it. Just email the pod with any requests. But yeah, The Secret and World Without Grown-Ups are the most directly linked to Young Justice as a whole, so that's why I decided to do just them. Anyway, not too much housekeeping today. I think my audio issue is resolved for now. Things are running smoothly on the social medias. No corrections from last week. This isn't a correction, but I did want to mention that I was looking at the panels I posted from The Secret last week, and I noticed that Bart's Impulse costume has a black outline around the lightning bolt design. Like, there's a black line around the red. And then in World Without Grown-Ups, the outline is red instead of black, and when Knox, Stucker, and Wright take back over for the actual series, the outline is still red. I mean, Jason Wright colored all of these comics, so I guess it was up to him the whole time, but I wonder if he started doing the red outline for World Without Grown-Ups and then just liked how it looked enough to keep it for the series. Just things you notice when you stare at comic panels for long enough, I think. But let's get into the comic, shall we? JLA World Without Grown-Ups #1 was released on June 3rd, 1998, and was written by Todd DeZago with Mike McKone and Humberto Ramos on pencils, Mark McKenna and Wayne Foucher on inks, Jason Wright on colors, John Workman on lettering, Art Studio Digital Chameleon on panel separation, and Eddie Berganza and Dana Curtin editing, editor and associate editor respectively. Wayne Foucher, Mark McKenna, Mike McKone, Humberto Ramos, and the coloring studio Heroic Age all contributed to the cover art, which I'll be displaying on screen in the YouTube version of this episode right now, but for those just listening, it's a wraparound cover with a blue background. The child characters are on a yellow roller coaster with Robin, Impulse, and Superboy in the front car. The Bedlam entity is behind them, posing ominously, and the adult JLA characters are worked into the background in dark blue line work, all looking very serious. I do love the contrast you can immediately see between Mike McKone and Humberto Ramos' art styles. I'll get into it more later, but it's very cool how they kept the theme of that separation between the children and adults even on the cover art. The synopsis of JLA World Without Grown-Ups #1 on DC Universe Infinite reads, "The heroes of the DC Universe find themselves separated by a mysterious force in a miniseries that introduces DC's newest super team, Young Justice. A boy receives a gift from his father and somehow triggers a force that puts all the humans 16 years and younger on one Earth and the adults on another. As the JLA searches for an answer to the mystery on one world, Robin, Impulse, Superboy, and other heroes try to keep a kid-ruled world from falling apart. Does Billy Batson hold the key to bridging the two worlds?" Well, yes he does. Sorry, spoiler alert, I guess. Anyway, I'm going to get into the comic now, so feel free to read along with me or just enjoy my dulcet tones. The book opens with narration from Batman as he stalks a criminal. He's impressed with the guy's skills, and we see Robin fighting him. Robin slips on an oil spill on the ground, and the criminal gets the upper hand. When he lifts Robin up over his head, ostensibly intending to drop Robin on his knee, Batman is reminded of the events of Nightfall, when Bane broke his back using a very similar move, and Batman steps in to help Robin. He says that he's been watching and asks Robin if he's alright. Robin seems surprised to see him, but says they should get the guy together. Batman says he'll get him himself and instructs Robin to go back to the cave. Robin protests, saying that he's fine and he followed this guy all the way here, but Batman insists. Robin is disappointed, but Batman says in narration that Robin wouldn't understand. So there's a little bait and switch here on the first pages where I believe we're initially thinking that it is Batman narrating, but then we see Tim fighting the bad guy and we're like, oh, it's Tim narrating. But then, psych, it really is Batman's narration. It's a cool little trick that I think is pretty unique to the medium. Like, I don't see how you'd pull off this specific ambiguity of narrator in any other medium besides a comic. But yeah, when I was reading, I was like, hey, I've been tricked. Love the Nightfall callback, still in recent memory of readers, I think, having been published only about 4 years prior to this book. The image of that, someone lifting a hero up over their head in that specific way, is very iconic and jarring and sort of genuinely frightening. I totally get why Batman stepped in. It is frustrating for Tim, but I do empathize with Batman just a tad more in this situation, especially with Jason in mind, too. Though I do believe that Tim could have taken that guy. In the next scene, we jump to Metropolis, where Superboy, still settling into his identity, is fighting a giant samurai robot, apparently sent to fight Superman. Superboy handily beats it and is about to take off when Lex Luthor interrupts and insists he help clean up the debris from the fight. Superboy tells him off and is about to leave again when Superman arrives. We see that Luthor has a keychain of the samurai robot. He presumably engineered this encounter and subsequent fight. Superman reluctantly agrees with Luthor that Superboy needs to do the right thing and help clean up. He says he'll help. This scene is just such a perfect microcosm of these characters. Superboy having a great time but being slightly reckless, Lex Luthor being evil for the greater good. Like, ostensibly he released the samurai robot on Metropolis in order to get Superboy good PR or whatever, and then Superman's just annoyed about having to deal with the whole situation. I definitely see why DC decided to just canonize Superboy being a direct clone of Superman and Luthor. The disgruntled co-parents / divorced dads dynamic is just a goldmine and one of the best possible situations for them to be in as characters, and one of the few things the show carries over and utilizes quite well from the comics. Rounding out our trio, the next scene is with Bart, home with Max Mercury and his visiting classmate Carol, impatiently waiting for popcorn to finish popping in the microwave. He then spills it when Max startles him. Max scolds him for being out when he's supposed to be doing homework in his room, so Bart does as he says. Max insists that Bart study at a normal speed too, which Bart hates. When Max comes back to tell Bart something else, though, he's gone, evidently to Puerto Rico to look for the chupacabra he just read about in a conspiracy / cryptid book. Max goes to get him and scolds him again. Bart goes back to his room, defeated and also now grounded by Max, who says he needs to learn to slow down and think and be more responsible with his powers. Bart looking for the chupacabra immediately upon learning about it is very iconic, but something to note that I didn't really mention in the summaries is that Tim, Con, and Bart end all 3 of their scenes by saying a very Bart Simpson-esque "oh man," in response to being scolded, punished, or otherwise inconveniently impeded upon by their respective mentors. So this obviously links them in this particular way to this particular theme, the ways, both subtle and obvious, in which adults and children, and subsequently heroes and their sidekicks, sort of bump elbows, if you will. The friction often created between children and the adults responsible for them. The complexities of that dynamic is central to the story of this comic, and perhaps even extends to touch the overall theme of Young Justice as a series itself. The sometimes troublesome coexistence of children and adults is of course relatable. We can all recall feeling this sort of stifling from adults when we were kids or teens, and it definitely puts the reader in the headspace to empathize with Matthew, who we're about to meet in the next scene. The next scene takes place in the suburbs outside of Boston, interestingly, a rare real place name drop from DC, where a 13-year-old Matthew Stewart is having a birthday party. He's upset that his dad isn't there to spend it with him, but then his dad walks through the door, having come home early from his archaeological dig. dig. Matt is still upset, so his dad gives him a special artifact he found on the dig as a birthday present. Apparently, the ancient toy of a young Atlantean boy. Matt accepts it, but says he wanted a Play-Tendo instead, much to his dad's disappointment and his mother's chagrin. He talks back to her, and she sends him to his room. She comments to Matt's father that he's been particularly fresh with her lately, and Mr. Stewart replies that it's due to him being away so much. Meanwhile, Matthew idly plays with the artifact in his room and wishes his parents would just leave him alone. The artifact starts glowing. Matt sees a figure inside and intuitively breaks the glass to release it. A large masculine purple entity is released, and Matt is seemingly immediately possessed by it. The entity shows Matt the history of its existence, and we get this narration. And he drowns in the dark purple energy. Immersed in the thick liquid light, he is assaulted with a rush of ancient images, scenes from prehistory, visions of a time that time has forgotten. A mad, malefic sorcerer, conjuring before an earth well, summons to him a power only alluded to in crumbling tomes, only whispered of in the darkest shadows, a power that feeds on dreams and on wishes, the power to reshape the world, the power of a god. But while the power is near infinite, the vessel is still but a man. His evil campaign is challenged by another sorcerer, his brother. The mad one's treachery and hatred blinds him and limits his imagination. This allows his sibling to purge the malevolent energies from the vile mage, and into a tiny crystal chamber. There it is imprisoned, and kept secreted from the memory of man for all time. The entity shows Matt this story through visions. Matt is shocked and excited by the revelation of how much power he's stumbled into, and immediately begins using the power to see what the world would be like if he was in charge. We see his parents go fuzzy and purple in the family portrait he has on his dresser, and then be erased completely, leaving just him and his siblings in the picture. Okay, look, I want to be clear that I'm not here to rag on artists ever on this podcast. Drawing comics is hard work. Artists often work on very tight deadlines and are chronically underpaid. And on top of that, all art is subjective. Artists have their own styles, which might appeal to some people and not to others, and that's all okay. All I will say is that drawing children is notoriously difficult if you typically draw adults. And Matthew Stewart does have the jaw of a linebacker in some of these panels, but certainly Mike McKone is a very competent artist in his own right. You guys should check out his Instagram for some great drawings. Much love. Moving on though. Okay. Listen, I think Matthew Stewart is kind of intentionally written as a quote-unquote bad kid in this scene, a chronically ungrateful complainer or something similar. Perhaps I'm too compassionate, but I low-key am like, well, he's just a kid, you know? And his parents, his father in particular, seem to be aware of the reason that he's been acting out, and in terms of being ungrateful for the present, look, he still accepted it. It's not like he threw it against the wall or threw a big tantrum. He just sort of complained. It's a parent's responsibility to know their child and their interests, therefore what kind of birthday present they might like. If Matt was a kid that actually did like history or even was a fan of Aquaman because of the toy's Atlantean origin, which I wonder if that's real or just sort of like Matt's dad's archaeological team got that one wrong, I guess we'll never know, then yeah, that artifact would be an acceptable gift. But Matt wanted a Play-Tendo, and that isn't a crime. Sorry, I don't know why I'm feeling so protective and sympathetic toward Matt. I think some of the moments later become really tragic when you remember that the Bedlam entity is basically imposing its power onto Matt and just borrowing his will. Anyway, basically having this kind of power thrust upon Matthew is so unfair, and I think would go horribly for literally anyone on the planet, even a hero. The power itself is the corrupting force. It's not that Matt is an inherently bad kid. I just had to say that. In terms of the artifact itself and the history of Bedlam that we and Matt are shown here, Bedlam as it appears here was created for this comic and doesn't really appear anywhere outside of the context of Young Justice as far as I know. There was a character named Dr. Bedlam in the 70s who was part of Darkseid's elite, unrelated, as well as a Baron Bedlam, some Nazi villain from the 80s, also unrelated. It's sort of surprising to me seeing as how popular it's recently been for DC and Marvel both to revamp or resurrect old or obscure characters. Bedlam is a really cool entity or villain, maybe a little overpowered actually, which could scare writers away from using it. Regardless, I really like all the lore we get here, and the visual elements we're shown to do with Bedlam's power, as well as how it transforms Matthew. The Earthwell mentioned as being used by the original sorcerer in the story also interests me. I can't find mention of it anywhere else in DC lore or even real magic practices, so it's probably just a cool word that Dezago made up, but definitely email the pod if you know anything about that, because I'd be interested to know. I do love the whole story though. I think it's awesome when comic writers can write text directly into comics other rather than dialogue or narration, and they can get a little purple with that prose. Always some of my favorite stuff. More of that to come in this series too. Oh, and the font of the lettering also changes for this part. Shout out to John Workman, it's an awesome effect. It's also of note that Matt doesn't even have to do anything in particular to activate the magic, like not directly wish for anything or do anything but think his desires before the magic of Bedlam latches on and begins making it a reality. Oh, and really quickly I looked up the etymology of the word Bedlam just because I was curious, and it comes from what we would now call a psychiatric hospital, but what they then called a lunatic asylum. Great. The Hospital of St. Mary of Bethlehem. Bethlehem, of course, being the birthplace of Jesus in Jerusalem. This hospital was in London in the late 1300s, and Bedlam is basically a distorted or regional English pronunciation of Bethlehem. The hospital was obviously for quote-unquote crazy people, so the word Bethlehem/Bedlam became synonymous with lunacy or chaos. Just thought that was interesting, though that doesn't really seem to have specifically inspired this incarnation of Bedlam. Moving on. The next day, we see Jack Drake try to summon his son Tim Drake, aka Robin, from his room, only to discover Tim's complete absence. It turns out other adults everywhere are having the same realization. All of the children in the world have seemingly vanished. In Alabama, Max thinks Bart has simply run off due to the grounding and is annoyed with him until he and Helen see what's happening on the news. Every time I see Jack Drake in a comic, I'm like, man. If you don't know, in DC fandom, I think it's because people love Tim and love to make Tim suffer in fan fiction and things of that nature. You know, that good, hurt, comfort. Jack Drake, Tim's father, often ends up being the executor of that suffering, and he's frequently characterized as abusive. There's little to no evidence of this in the comics. I mean, it depends on the run and on the writer and the reader's interpretation, but mostly he's just some guy. He loves Tim, he cares about Tim, he's a good dad. So every time I see him in comics, I'm like, hey man, sorry for what they're doing to you on AO3, brother. It just, not that people shouldn't do that, I've read some very good fics where Jack Drake is abusive, and clearly it's an outlet for people to work some things out surrounding their own relationships with their fathers. And it's definitely a convenient way to put Tim in situations. It's just one of the most wild fanonization events that I've ever seen. But I mean, this kind of thing happens occasionally. It reminds me a lot of Lucius Malfoy, actually, and in a lot of Harry Potter fanon, people make Lucius Malfoy physically abusive when, that is not the case in canon, and, it's not even implied, really. Not that Lucius Malfoy is a good father, but he doesn't hit Draco. But that does often end up being the case in fanfiction, so maybe Lucius Malfoy and Jack Drake should get together, talk about that, But anyway, sorry to all the Jack Drake fans out there furious about his widespread mischaracterization. Condolences to all 5 of you. But anyway, yeah, in the scene at the end, the news anchor does specify that only children younger than 17 have disappeared, which is interesting to me. I wonder if that's the Bedlam entity's call about what counts as a kid, or Matthew's. Maybe Matthew knows some real killjoy 17-year-olds and was like, nah, they're too far gone. Meanwhile, on the moon, which is something I love to say, some of the JLA is gathered in the Watchtower, trying to figure out what has happened to no avail. Green Lantern, who is Kyle Rayner here, comes back from scanning the whole planet with his power ring, and also has nothing. Kyle tries to crack a joke, but it falls flat, and they are all frustrated. Martian Manhunter says that every mystery leaves its clues, and that while things are bad here for the adults, he is actually more worried about the kids, wherever they are. So Martian Manhunter seems to be leading the charge here, perhaps in the absence of the Trinity, who are probably covering the more direct heroing on Earth. But yeah, always love to see John, and Kyle, of course. I really love Kyle's Green Lantern outfit. I think it's my favorite Green Lantern uniform, though I'm sure I haven't seen them all. Also of note is that Wally is the Flash here, not Barry. There's sort of a funny gag here where John ends the scene by saying that the kids must be terrified, and of course in the next scene we see that the kids are having a great time so far. Speaking of, over on Kid World, it's total chaos, or you could even say bedlam. Narration tells us that while initially scared or confused, most kids thereafter launched into celebration and fun mode. Kids are running wild, and one jumps off a roof with nothing but an umbrella in hopes to be a superhero, egged on by his friends. Mary Marvel catches him and makes him promise not to do it again, though they aren't as discouraged as she'd like. We see Arrow Arrowette and Wonder Girl doing various hero work, as we're told that all the teen heroes are working overtime to mitigate the chaos of the situation. We see Inferno, Spoiler, the Teen Titans, Superboy at the Ferris airfield, Bart saving kids at the zoo, and Robin busting wannabe gangsters in Gotham. Superboy and Impulse successfully avert their respective disasters at the airfield and Montgomery Zoo, and they meet up along with Robin at the airfield. Robin found them on his radar, and he suggests that they put their heads together to figure out what happened and how to fix it. Impulse asks why them instead of the JLA, and Superboy points out that if all the adults are gone, then there is no JLA. Robin agrees and says that they themselves are all the world's got for now. Immediately, Humberto Ramos' style is so incredibly striking here. This panel of Mary Marvel catching the kid is one of my favorites, just her face and the way her hair is colored. Ramos is definitely one of my favorite artists. He's currently over at Marvel and worked on The Spectacular Spider-Man with Greg Weisman in 2024, if you want to support him. But yeah, it was such a great choice to have two distinct pencilers for Kid World and Adult World. It brings so much more visual interest to the book and makes that divide feel even more tangible to the reader. Ramos also brings a kind of surreality to the art here that really works and makes Kid World feel even more chaotic and out of control. Mark McKenna and Wayne Foucher also match that with the inks, and Jason Wright, I think, uses slightly more vibrant colors for Kid World, though I could be wrong. Maybe it's just an effect of the style. Definitely let me know what you guys think of the art. It's great to see our girls Arrowette and Wonder Girl here, among other heroes, and you really do get the impression as a reader that what our Young Justice members and company do is an act of choice, and a hard one at that. Like, among all these other kids, albeit mostly quite a bit younger than our heroes, doing reckless things, every teen hero is suited up, running themselves ragged to stop disasters and keep order. You really get a sense of what they're sacrificing to do hero work. The need to grow up faster, be more responsible, disengage from peers, and perhaps miss out on formative experiences in favor of the greater good. This section is a great illustration of that and what makes teen heroes different from other kids their age, besides powers, of course. Great to see my girl Spoiler too, of course. I love her New Earth incarnation and outfit. Honestly, I don't have much to say about the boys' specific crises, just that it's so amazing to see them in Ramos' style. There's a great panel of Robin that I'll be showing on screen in the YouTube version now. Tim has maybe never looked cooler as Robin. Very sweet to see Superboy interacting with the kid flying the jet, and also some more demonstration and explanation of how his TTK works. He says in one panel that if he tries to stop the jet all at once, it'll just come apart in his hands, so he has to be gentle with the TTK and use it to slow the speed of the jet gradually. I also really love Bart asking the kids at the zoo to time him while he puts all the animals back in their cages. Very funny panel there. And also a great example of Bart's competence, that he can be responsible when it comes down to it. Speaking of responsibility, I love the realization that they are, in fact, this world's Justice League while the adults are gone. It's a great lead-in and reason for them to form Young Justice as a permanent team after this. Also, a funny panel of Bart inspecting Robin's bike and asking if the JLA are on strike. Like, that would be the only reason that they're not currently available. But yeah, the moment of them being like, well, we're it, like, we're the JLA right now, is very #origin story, and I love it. So after that, the three of them go back to the Batcave, but have no luck scanning for any signals. Robin points out that without adults, Kid World will soon run out of food, water, and all other necessities. He says he'll try and connect to the Watchtower's computer to see if it has any information. Meanwhile, Bart has been looking around the cave in the background, and he asks why Robin keeps his old suit in a glass case. Robin yells at him to get away from it, and Bart, shocked, obeys. There's no response from the Watchtower, but not just because no one's there. Apparently, there is no Watchtower at all in this world. Then they do get a signal coming through. It's Billy Batson, broadcasting, reporting on the various disasters happening in Kid World, asking for help and where the JLA is. Bart says, "Wow, does he mean us?" And Superboy says, he does now. It seems like Tim recognizes Billy. Okay, some big stuff here. Of course, Jason Todd's ghost haunts every single DC comic published between November 22nd, 1988 and March 1st, 2006. Perhaps arguably those afterward too. But yeah, no one is perhaps more aware of that ghost than Tim Drake, though he doesn't often talk about it. But it is an intense reminder to see him so protective over the suit, and by extension, Jason's legacy, to the point that he'd actually yell at Bart, and we're shown how out of character it is for him by Bart's instant obedience without objection or complaint, as well as Superboy's surprise about the whole thing. It is very funny though that Bart asks Tim if he keeps that suit separate because it smells funny. Great stuff. Also, Jason's old suit in the glass case is colored with slightly brighter colors, and I just really love that. The implication that Tim's suit is more muted, like as a repercussion of Jason's death, like the world is just a little less bright now that that particular boy wonder is dead. Like, I don't know, I just really love that art, and I think it conveys something much more profound than any words from Tim really could in that moment. I just love the art in this whole scene, honestly. Shout out specifically to Jason Wright for the Robin suit coloring, as I mentioned, and also all the colors and light and shadows are just so pitch perfect and reflect the more solemnly contemplative tone of this moment in the Batcave. I do have some questions about the absence of the watchtower, but we'll get to that later when we learn more about how the manifestation of Matthew Stewart's wish through Bedlam worked exactly. It's so cute and smart of Billy to be broadcasting an SOS, and I'm really interested by the Tim-Billy dynamic we get here, but I'll talk more about that in a couple of scenes. Back to the watchtower, Superman is video calling with, yes, the actual 42nd President of the United States, Bill Clinton. Both have nothing much to relay. Flash expresses his frustration and wonders where they aren't looking. Meanwhile, Batman, also watching a broadcast from Clinton in the Batcave, is fixated on one particular line, the face of the Earth. He swipes a finger through some dust on the floor and begins analyzing something with the Bat computer. Look, I don't know why comics do this, but yeah, inclusion of actual real-life US presidents is not uncommon, unfortunately. I don't know, it's always very silly and jarring to me. It immediately breaks my immersion and makes me be like, why is Superman talking to Bill Clinton right now? DC has always seemed slightly more removed from reality to me than Marvel, which is kind of silly, like, you know, kind of comparing apples to apples here, but like the president thing isn't as weird to me in Marvel comics for some reason. But yeah, anyway, what do you guys think Batman thought of Watergate? Okay, sorry, moving on. Of course, Batman's going to figure this out. Bruce has got this. Next, we go to check in on Matthew, and the narration tells us, somewhere dark, he calls himself Bedlam. He calls his new world that as well, and the air crackles and bends with violent violet magic as he exercises his newfound near-infinite powers, his every whim and desire instantly realized before his darkly glowing eyes. The imagination of a 13-year-old kid brought to life, albeit with a roiling, bruise-colored tinge, with his giant, nameless benefactor standing nearby in silent attendance. The boy who was once Matthew Stewart boggles at the possibilities of this power he now wields. We see Matthew luxuriating in this new power, and he talks about having thought up a whole world. All it took was apparently using the most powerful child's mind as a conduit to keep that world existing. He says that the more adults and children believe, the more imagination they feed him with, and the more powerful he'll become. Matthew, still monologuing, mentions that once he becomes invincible, then his mom and dad will see. He briefly snaps out of it, eyes clearing of the purple bedlam glow, grief overtaking him at the mention of his mother and father, but the Bedlam entity forcibly wrests back psychic control over Matthew. Some more great prose from DeZago. I know it's kind of supposed to be a bit like the gravitas of the prose in contrast to Matthew's cavalier attitude and teenage vocabulary, but the phrase bruise-colored tinge unironically gave me chills when I read it. Some interesting lore drops about the specifics of the Bedlam power. We don't yet know the identity of the so-called most powerful child, but it's interesting that they serve as a conduit for Matthew and Bedlam, maybe as a way to avoid the madness of the original sorcerer, and also the idea that the belief in the new reality is what's feeding its continued existence. Some cool philosophical stuff there about the nature of reality. Some pretty grim stuff, though, with Matthew obviously missing his mom and dad, but being forced to continue with this endeavor by the Bedlam entity. I really feel so bad for Matt, like he didn't deserve any of this. In the next scene, Bart, Superboy, and Robin are headed to Fawcett City at Robin's behest and go to the broadcasting station to talk to Billy. They find him there, and Billy mistakes Impulse for Kid Flash to Bart's annoyance. He says he gets that a lot. Robin takes Billy aside and says that he knows Billy's secret identity and encourages him to become Captain Marvel to help out. But Billy is very scared of disappearing or dying once he turns into his adult form. Superboy teases Bart when he asks Superboy what he thinks Robin and Billy are talking about, Superboy saying that they're probably talking about him, but then everyone gets interrupted by a weather alert that there's a weather anomaly gathering over Happy Harbor. It's very funny that Bart gets constantly mistaken for Kid Flash. He will become Kid Flash later, of course, but I just always love the gag of a superhero's name being kind of unintuitive and therefore always getting mistaken for someone else. Very in character for Tim to be like, obviously the next step is for Billy to turn into Captain Marvel. But if I was Billy, I'd be really scared too. They have no way of knowing what'll happen when he does that, and it's true that he might be of more help on Kid World than elsewhere. Back in Adult World, Batman is calling into the Watchtower with the revelation that he carbon dated everything in the Batcave, and it's all exactly 17 hours old. The whole world they're in is just a simulacrum or recreation of the original Earth. He thinks that the kids didn't disappear, but the adults did. Everyone is very concerned by this, of course, and they wonder what kind of power the kids could be up against without them. They are all relieved that the young heroes are there to help keep things in order, but Wally seems very worried about Bart. So I don't really know the whole Wally-Bart lore, so I wonder if there's a particular reason that Wally is so worried. I mean, I kind of undersold that last panel. Wally looks downright horrified, and I don't know why this realization would be coming to him now. Like, I guess he maybe just hadn't thought of Bart until they mentioned the young heroes, but like Bart's been there this whole time, like surely it's fine. I am curious about the fact that, like, okay, if the adult world is a recreation, I don't get why there wouldn't be a watchtower on Kid World. Like, wouldn't there just be 2 watchtowers? Or maybe the moon wasn't included in the recreation, I'm really not sure. But no, because they have a moon, the kids do, they check the watchtower. I really don't know. Again, questions above my pay grade. Maybe I'm misunderstanding something, I don't know. Anyway, on Kid World, the boys plus Billy are wondering what's going on at Happy Harbor, remembering that that's where the JLA and Legion's old headquarters are. Bart quickly goes to check and comes back, saying that the rest of them have to see what's going on. Robin asks Billy once more if he's sure he doesn't want to try, but Billy refuses again, saying it won't do any good if he just disappears, but as long as he's there, maybe he can help in other ways. Robin leaves with Impulse and Superboy. He says within earshot of Billy, "I thought maybe Billy could help us, but I guess I was wrong." Arriving at Happy Harbor, the boys discover it to be completely strange and warped. The ground shifts under them, and they end up hanging off a precipice. Meanwhile, Billy, disheartened, contemplates and eventually comes to the conclusion that he has to try and begins to say Shazam. Okay, first of all, Legion mention, which is the licensed extra-governmental interstellar operatives network, which Lobo is briefly a part of. So, you know, indirect Lobo mention. Second of all, Tim is being so rude here. Oh my god. He's like basically bullying Billy. He was directly looking at him when he was like, "I thought maybe Billy could help us, but I guess I was wrong." And before that, when he's trying to convince Billy, he's like, "Well, you are a hero, like you should do something." Tim, you don't know what'll happen if Billy transforms either. You could be sending him to his death. Of course it all turns out alright, but god Tim, maybe a softer approach next time. It's also good to note that Billy's Shazamming does in fact fix everything in the TV show's adaptation of this story. Of course it'll be a bit more complicated here in the comic. And okay, I just have to say, and this is not me trying to be mean about the art, but this last panel, Billy's face is drawn. Well, he's opening up his mouth really wide to say Shazam, and the effect is... I will just put up the image on screen in the YouTube version, but basically his proportions are very distorted in such a way that it comes across, to me personally, as slightly comedic. I did die laughing the first time I saw it, but I get that I think it's supposed to be, like, very dramatic. I think. I don't know. I always kind of have trouble determining whether, like, drawings alone, like, without dialogue or text to help me, like, are supposed to be comedic or serious. Because sometimes they really walk the line there. But that's the end of issue 1. I think I'll talk about my overall thoughts at the end, so let's just jump right into issue 2. JLA World Without Grown-Ups number 2 was released on July 8th, 1998, so about a month after the first issue. It was written by Todd DeZago, the adult storyline was penciled by Mike McCone and inked by Mark McKenna, while the kids storyline was penciled by Humberto Ramos and inked by Paul Neary. Jason Wright on colors, John Workman on lettering, Art Studio Digital Chameleon on panel separations, and Eddie Braganza editing with Dana Curtin as associate editor once again. Humberto Ramos, Wayne Foucher, Mike McCone, Mark McKenna, and Coloring Studio Heroic Age all contributed to the cover art, which I'll be displaying on screen on the YouTube version of this episode, but don't worry if you're just listening because I will describe it. It's another wraparound cover like the first issue, though this time our kid characters are in that dark blue outline on the white background above the JLA, who are in full color on the bottom. Superboy, Robin, and Impulse are on the front cover, along with JLA members Zoriel, Wonder Woman, Batman, Green Lantern, Flash, and Superman, all fighting what seems to be a giant hand made out of rock or earth. On the back cover, some of the villains we'll be seeing in this issue are in the boys' place. Metallo, Gorilla Grodd, and Joker, who is kind of hard to identify as such due to not being in full color, but it definitely is him. And our JLA members on this side are Martian Manhunter, Steel, Captain Marvel, Plastic Man, Big Barda, and Aquaman, fighting another rock hand. It's a good cover, very colorful, and I think the characters stand out a little bit better on the white background than on issue 1's blue background. But aside from that, I love all the poses here, lots to look at. The summary of JLA World Without Grown-Ups number 2 on DC Universe Infinite reads as such. The heroes of the DC Universe find themselves separated by a mysterious force in the conclusion of the miniseries that introduces DC's newest super team, Young Justice. Having said his magic word, Billy Batson is lightning bolted to the adult world, but much to his surprise, he has not been transformed into Captain Marvel. On Kid World, Robin, Superboy, and Impulse go after the cause of all their troubles, the kid villain Bedlam. He's using the JLA's original cave headquarters as his stronghold, and to keep the youthful heroes away, he's using junior versions of the Joker, Metallo, and Gorilla Grodd as guards. The JLA can't help the kids, and if the kids don't win, the two worlds will remain permanently separate. But the scariest thing is that the key to victory may lie in the hands of DC's most reckless youth, Impulse. Rude, but perhaps true. Alright, let's get into the comic. Feel free to read along with me. In the first scene of the second issue, we pick up right where we left off with Billy saying Shazam, but he doesn't transform into Captain Marvel. He does, however, get transported into space, where he sees two different Earths, both surrounded by crackling purple energy. He deduces that one Earth must be where the adults went, while the other is where he came from, with the other kids. He makes up his mind to get the information to the right people, moving toward one Earth, presumably adult world. These panels are really beautiful. I love any time we go to space. It's always so fun to see artists' interpretations of the final frontier, and it's very funny that the kid world has land formations that make a smiley face. Good job on that one, Matthew. Meanwhile, back on Kid World, Robin, Impulse, and Superboy are still in a sticky situation. The three of them are hanging precariously over an unfriendly-looking pit, Robin hanging onto Impulse, who is hanging onto Superboy. The trees and environment have become hostile and are scratching at Superboy, trying to force them into the pit. Bart remarks that their circumstances are remarkably similar to a video game called Nazi Dinosaurs from Venus. He says, "It's got trees like this, and hidden pits, and acid snow, and these huge Nazi dinosaurs." Indeed, a huge Nazi dinosaur appears and menaces them. Robin, who hasn't been able to get his line out due to the trees, takes the opportunity of the dinosaur roaring to throw his line, which wraps around the dinosaur's uvula, which causes it to snap its mouth shut and jerk its head up, successfully lifting them up out of the pit. They land on the ground, and Superboy tells Bart to whip up a whirlwind around the dinosaur to lift it into the air, which he does. Superboy then punches the dinosaur into the distance. Commenting on their teamwork, Robin says it would be great if they could just do it on purpose next time. Then they look up to find the entrance to the JLA headquarters has been changed completely, now looking like the entrance to a theme park and displaying a sign that welcomes them to quote-unquote Bedlam. Humberto Ramos's art really blossoms here with Paul Neary's inks. The panel of the boys hanging over the pit is really cool. Also, the visual gag alone of a dinosaur wearing a leather jacket with a swastika on it is, in fact, very funny. And of course, Bart recognizes the video game that Matthew is perhaps subconsciously basing their plight off of. I don't really know what Tim means about doing good teamwork on purpose. Like, Superboy explicitly tells Bart to do something that will help him, which Bart does, and it helps him. Is that not, like, definitionally teamwork? And they definitely did it on purpose. Like, I don't know what more Tim wants, but I guess his standards are high. At the end of this scene, still sort of commenting on their teamwork, Tim says something to the effect of, "I have a funny feeling that we're about to find out just how good of a team we are," like while looking up at the imposing Bedlam entrance. And then in response, Superboy says, "Funny like South Park funny," or which I was so sure that it wasn't possible that he was referencing the show South Park, which is still airing today, by the way, that I figured he meant either a different media property also named South Park or an actual place called South Park. But I looked up when the show started just in case, and lo and behold, the first episode of South Park aired in 1997, bro? I don't know, this really blew my mind. I guess I thought South Park started in like 2005 at the earliest. It was just so part of the late 2000s zeitgeist. And I also didn't think that that was what Superboy was referencing because, look, I've literally never seen an episode of South Park, but my impression is that it's quite like edgy adult humor. I mean, I know that teenagers watched and still watch it, but the target audience for Young Justice and comics like it just seems a little bit younger to me, like more tween than teen. I don't know, if you were a tween or younger watching South Park in 1998, please email the pod. I would love to know that this person exists. We catch up with Matthew in the next scene, who is of course inside the JLA headquarters / Bedlam, and is musing about the situation, reiterating that he's using the mind of the most powerful child to keep up this power, and the longer that things stay this way, the more people believe in this reality, the more powerful he will become by proxy, and soon he will truly have the power of a god. But first, he says, he has to take care of these super dopes. Indeed, we see that he has the Nazi Dinosaurs from Venus video game. He considers playing and once again briefly snaps out of the Bedlam haze, saying that he wants to play and that this was supposed to be fun, but then the Bedlam benefactor / entity takes control again with the purple energy. Matthew says that there will be plenty of time for play once these annoyances are dealt with. This panel is really cool, one of my faves. I'll show it on screen on YouTube. It's the Bedlam entity standing behind Matthew, who is sitting in a beanbag chair in his sick new supervillain fit. I don't know, maybe it's that purple is my favorite color, but I just love all the Bedlam aura farming panels so much. We're mostly retreading territory here. Gotta get that previously on for readers who originally had to wait a month for this issue to come out after the first one, so not much for me to say. Maybe I'm stupid, but I had literally no idea who the most powerful child in the world he's talking about was until it's revealed. I also wasn't entirely sure that Matthew wasn't talking about himself. Like, it's kind of ambiguous, or I wasn't sure what to make of those lines on first reading, but of course in retrospect it's obviously he's talking about Billy Batson / Captain Marvel. Maybe it's just because I haven't read that much Captain Marvel, but yeah. Still feeling bad for Matthew over here. He didn't ask for this. He just wants to play Tendo and his parents. In Adult World on the Watchtower, Clark reiterates that they themselves, as in the adults, have been transported to an exact copy of Earth, while the kids stayed on the original. They wonder who or what could be powerful enough to do such a thing, and Batman, calling in, confirms that they're probably dealing with this particular threat for the first time, and is obviously very powerful. Batman ends the call, and Steel warns of an incoming energy signature, which turns out to be Billy. Plastic Man and Green Lantern both subdue Billy, thinking him an enemy, but Martian Manhunter rightly recognizes Billy as Captain Marvel, and makes Kyle and Patrick release him. Superman asks what Billy's doing there, and where Captain Marvel is, and Billy explains everything. He wonders, indeed, where is Captain Marvel? He explains that the purple energy he saw connecting the two worlds was coming from somewhere on the East Coast called Happy Harbor. The other boys left to check it out before Billy shazammed. Some JLA members seem to know what this means, but others don't. Regardless, they all take off. It's very funny to immediately jump any 11-year-old. I mean, it is very strange circumstances that Billy shows up in, so I don't really blame Kyle or Patrick for trapping him at first, but it is very funny that John Johns is always like, I'm surrounded by idiots. Oracle mentioned by Batman. I love when people call her the Oracle, like, hell yes, she is the Oracle. Put some respect on Barbara Gordon's name, you know? I suppose that the JLA members are just reacting to the fact that Happy Harbor is the old JLA headquarters. I'm not sure. I also haven't read that much JLA, but if anyone has other context to their reactions here, let me know. Back in Kid World, the boys are having trouble actually reaching the entrance of Bedlam. Like a mirage in the desert, it seems to only get farther away the more distance they cover. Tim wonders how powerful whoever they're dealing with might be to be able to completely bend reality to their will. He says something about the JLA headquarters and the fact that their landscape looks like some kind of twisted Tim Burton cartoon, and then cartoon animals dressed as the JLA explode in front of them out of nowhere. As soon as they appear, they're gone, and Bart worries that he just made that happen because he was just thinking about the JLA and cartoons due to Tim's comment. Robin wonders if they're dealing with a mind reader of some kind, and Superboy is extremely dismayed at this revelation. He says, "Oh, that's just great. Someone who can alter reality and read your mind. We are going to get so spanked. Someone with that kind of power, we're done. I mean, that's like, imagine your worstest possible villain, and suddenly all three of them disappear, ostensibly having just imagined their worst possible villains." As an aside, something that I love is how Humberto Ramos gives Superboy this like really dramatic Superman curl that's just longer than the rest of his hair. Ramos even somehow makes that incredibly high fade look good, or at least unobtrusive to my eyes. I always love stuff with like having to be careful with your thoughts, maybe because I find that to be a very relatable concept as someone with OCD. Like, it's my worst nightmare, but it's also like cathartic to see characters have to live a version of my symptoms. A really cute detail about the JLA cartoon animals is that one of them says, "Just a lot of animals coming through," as in JLA stands for just a lotta animals. Very funny. Tim Burton mentioned by his alleged namesake, Timothy Drake. Still wild to me. And Superboy's characterization here is a little strange. He just seems a little more childish and lacks his typical overconfidence. Preemptively whining about a villain they'll have to face just seems a little out of character to me. Usually he'd be like, come on, we can take him. But maybe it just speaks to how overwhelming the situation is. I don't know. So Superboy is suddenly transported somewhere else where a strange kid version of Metallo starts fighting him. Superboy tries to get in a preemptive strike, but Metallo reveals that he's been upgraded. It's not just his heart that's kryptonite, but all of him. He punches Superboy, and we cut over to Bart, having also been transported. He comes face to face with a kid version of Gorilla Grodd. All the boys have thought of their worstest villains, evidently, and have had them realized by Bedlam. At the beginning of the scene, Superboy is sort of berating himself mentally for not realizing he shouldn't have given a villain with telepathic capabilities such great cannon fodder in terms of realizing the boy's worst nightmares, and he does call himself Kid in Thought Bubble, which is like one of his main nicknames, the Kid or Kid, but I thought it was funny for him to call himself that. I suppose in place of either Experiment 13 or Superboy, Kid is more casual and nickname adjacent. On the topic of Superboy being susceptible to kryptonite, look, it's stupid. If you're making a clone of Superman that is critically not actually his real DNA clone, wouldn't the single actual advantage of doing it that way be that since Khan is technically 100% human, he's not allergic to kryptonite? I suppose the in-universe explanation is that the scientists at Cadmus, in tinkering with his DNA to at least closely replicate that of a Kryptonian, perhaps accidentally flipped on the gene that would make him weak to kryptonite. I don't know, I wasn't very good at science in school, but that's my most generous explanation. Once again, canonizing Khan being an actual clone of Superman fixes so many of these little gaps in sense-making that comics so often leave. Metallo as a villain has a long and complicated history. At one point Lex Luthor framed him for the murder of Thomas and Martha Wayne. We seriously can't unpack all of that right now. But it makes sense, I guess, for him to be Superboy's worstest villain. Metallo does say hasta la pasta baby to Superboy at the end of the scene, and baby is spelled B-A-B-E-E-E, which is unfortunately hilarious. Impulse's villain being Grodd is a little more mystifying. I suppose considering his lineage, wouldn't Bart theoretically be most scared of his evil grandfather, Professor Zoom, at the height of his villainy? But I don't think they wanted to make things that intense in this particular story, and Professor Zoom might be dead actually at this point, and plus it was probably just the first villain they thought of that Bedlam latched onto, so I'm not saying this is a plot hole or anything. Anyway, let's see what our fearless leader is up to. Robin, also transported, faces down a kid version of the Joker. Joker starts needling Robin about living up to the long shadow of his mentor, and the fact that Robin is powerless and brings nothing to the team of himself, Impulse, and Superboy. Tim plays into it a little, but after a moment it's revealed that he's realized that if his mind is making the rules while something else is making it real, all he has to do is think his way out, which he does. He reaches through a portal to Superboy and asks Superboy to tag him, which Superboy does, switching their places in each other's illusions. Metallo is shocked to see Robin, who says, "Yeah, and you know something, Tin Man? To me, kryptonite is just another rock." Robin takes down Metallo and explodes him with his mind. I'm not joking, that is actually literally what happens. Then in Impulse's illusion, we see Superboy reach through and ask Bart to tag him, which he does, switching their places. Superboy makes quick work of Grodd and meets back up with Robin, but then they realize that Bart is probably stuck with the Joker. But we see that Bart is actually driving the Joker crazy rather than the other way around. The Joker illusion also explodes, and Robin reaches through to grab Bart and bring him back to the real world with Robin and Superboy. All three are reunited back where they were, right outside of Bedlam. It is kind of funny and tragic that Superboy and Impulse just get really strong villains, and of course Tim has to be psychologically tortured. Joker is literally in a cell, theoretically unable to physically harm Tim, but I suppose what Tim finds frightening about the Joker is his capacity to manipulate, or perhaps that in combination with Tim's own insecurities, which we see on full display here. I think it makes a lot of sense that since this is kind of Tim's first time working so closely with superpowered individuals, it draws his attention to his own lack thereof. When he's just Batman's partner, it doesn't matter so much because his only job there is to be as good as Batman, or at least striving to reach that. But on a team with Bart and Con, he feels those expectations shifting and is probably internally having some trouble finding his footing with them, though he'd never say these things out loud, of course. Also, Joker mentions Tim's bow staff, which is funny because he doesn't really use it too often with the YJ team. Joker also has a line here where he's welcoming Tim and basically saying, "Have a seat, stay for dinner, you'll have to take off your shoes though. We're having Chinese. Last night we had Hungarian and we had to take off our," and Tim cuts him off there. But I was really curious about what Joker was implying here. I mean, I get the first part, of course, it's custom in East Asia to take off shoes inside the house, but I have no idea what he could be implying about Hungary. I looked up Hungarian stereotypes and came up with nothing. I also posted this panel to the DC Reddit, and someone said that this comic came out the year that Viktor Orbán took power, a prime minister of Hungary, so it could be political, and of course my mind goes to Joker finishing that sentence with either head or genitals, which is the kind of thing that he'd find funny. Like, if there's a joke or historical instance of the Hungarian government doing beheadings or castration or something, I have no idea, but please email the pod if you know. A reference I do know, however, is Joker calling Tim Clarice in that first panel, Silence of the Lambs, Anthony Hopkins, Judy Foster. Anyway, moving on. Of course it's Tim who figures out that he needs to think his way out of the situation, though I don't know why the boys tagging each other would switch their places in each other's illusions. Like, the first time I read this, I thought when they tagged, it was just bringing the taggee into the tagger's illusion, but on reread they are actually switching places, which is why Bart ends up with the Joker. Superboy had switched with Tim and then switched with Bart. Like, I'm under the impression that these are not actual physical spaces that Bedlam sent them to, but maybe they are. That would explain this a little, but honestly I'm probably just thinking about it too hard. Love that to Tim. Kryptonite is just another rock. What a great line. Love the exploding the villains with their minds. I mean, this is just kind of how it's drawn when a Bedlam illusion appears or disappears, but the way that it is drawn, Tim's panel with Metallo specifically, really looks like he is telepathically exploding him, which I love. But I also do really love the teamwork aspect of this section. The implication that one person's weakness might not affect a teammate, and it's okay to get help in situations in which you're at a specific disadvantage. Tim isn't susceptible to kryptonite, Superboy isn't afraid of Grodd, and Bart apparently can drive even the Joker more insane than he already is. I will say I have this pet theory about Bart's brain. Much is said or implied about it throughout the series, that his mind is somehow unique, perhaps due to Bart's strange upbringing, or being born with the ability to manipulate the Speed Force rather than imbued with its power like Barry and Wally, or being from the future, or any combination of those factors. Anyway, just flagging his worst villain being one that can control minds, and also him being able to I don't know if I want to say outwit, but perhaps out-annoy the Joker. Like, the idea of his mind being unable to be touched by madness because it's like a double negative. Like, his mind is already on insane Speed Force drugs, so it's literally impossible for him to be affected by something as mundane as human insanity. I'll talk more about this with some other moments, but just always thinking about Bart's weird brain. It's on my radar. In the next scene, we are back on Adult World. The JLA have arrived in Happy Harbor to find a small trace of Bedlam's magic, which Billy recognizes as such. He says that it also knows that they're there, and the ground erupts around them, forming two big rock hands that try to crush them. These are featured on the cover, if you recall. Yeah, I don't really know why they chose the rock hands to put on the cover. They're such a small part of the story, but I guess they wanted it to look exciting. It's interesting that Billy can sense magic, I guess because he's technically a product of magic. I really need to read more Captain Marvel, but that's cool. I've loved everything so far of Billy, so I really do have to get on that. Back to Kid World, the boys cautiously enter Bedlam / the JLA headquarters. Some things are the same, but in the wrong place or slightly different in some way. Robin really wants to be cautious and careful, but Bart finds the old storage trophy room and immediately starts looking around at all of the cool stuff. Superboy and Robin discourage him, reminding him what they're there for, and the three of them go to the conference room, where a picture of the original Justice League is displayed. The three boys look at it in awe, wondering if they will ever live up to that standard. Robin and Superboy wonder what the reason is for Bedlam to be messing with them in this way, and Robin suggests that he's stalling and they should try to catch him by surprise. Meanwhile, Bart is still staring up at the picture, at the original Flash specifically. He says, "Grandpa," and then Robin calls Bart to follow them and he races off to join his friends. It's really funny that when Bart is getting too distracted, Robin and Superboy just kind of look at each other, and then Superboy goes, "I'll tell him." Really kind of demonstrating that mom, dad, parents of impulse thing they were talking about in Young Justice: The Secret. I really love this moment they have looking up at the portrait of the original JLA. It's almost emotional, them acknowledging the legacy that they're carrying on, kind of by default if they continue to work together in this capacity. Whether they like it or not, they are kind of a mini JLA, and that's how people will identify them in the world. Bart's moment with the portrait is really unironically quite touching. Barry is currently dead in this continuity, and on top of that, Bart didn't really ever get to meet him, if I recall correctly. He mostly was with Iris and his parents, and there's also the element of Barry being the original Flash. I mean, not actually, but you know what I mean. And Bart having this insane standard to live up to. I mean, this is something that, of course, most of the Young Justice heroes struggle with, but I imagine it hits Bart particularly hard being the actual genetic descendant of one of the original JLA members. I love this whole scene here, and it's some really impressive expression work from Humberto Ramos. You can really read the complex emotions playing on all of their faces when they see the portrait, and especially Bart's in those panels. I definitely recommend checking those out if you can. In Adult World, the JLA is fighting the Rock Hands, but Zor-El notices Billy wandering into the cave, so Flash quickly goes in after him, coming face to face with Captain Marvel in some sort of suspended animation. Martian Manhunter says he's unable to reach Captain Marvel telepathically, but then telepathically communicates to Billy that he might be able to use Billy as a psionic conduit, since Billy and Captain Marvel are technically the same person. Billy gives him permission, and all is revealed to them through Martian Manhunter. The narration says, "In executing the creation of a separate and identical world, the omnipotent Bedlam required a nexus through which to focus his magics, an unwitting instrument with which to give form to this new reality, an ingenious id to give shape to this new world, a dreamer to dream the dream. Though the mightiest mortal on the planet, Captain Marvel's mind is still that of Billy Batson, his dreams and fantasies those of a 13-year-old boy. What better template, then, for the juvenile godling to use than the bright imagination of the most childlike of adults, who just happens to have the wisdom of Solomon?" Martian Manhunter communicates this to the rest of them, including the fact that the world they now inhabit is nothing but the dream of Captain Marvel. Kyle suggests waking Captain Marvel up, but Plastic Man is fearful of what would happen to them, all the adults in the world, if they wake up the person who is actively dreaming their reality. Yay, all has been revealed. I think Tasaga does a pretty good job of explaining everything here. I do have some questions about how separate the entities of Billy Batson and Captain Marvel are. Like, does Billy not feel any of the psychic drain from Bedlam using his Captain Marvel form as, like, basically cloud storage for the adult world? But, you know, we roll. I do always love Martian Manhunter being discreet and quite courteous. Like, since he knows Billy hasn't disclosed his secret identity to everyone in the JLA, he communicates telepathically about using him as a psionic conduit. Just Gentleman John, you know? Love that guy. I really need to read Absolute Martian Manhunter, which is ending right now, I think, or just ended. But anyway, back in Kid World, the boys have found Bedlam, who explains the situation to them. Bart wonders who the purple entity behind Matthew is, while Superboy asks what he did to all the adults, and Bedlam demonstrates his power of imagination by forcing rock pillars to erupt from under the three of them. He tells them that he knows who they are, but he's not sure he can imagine a way to defeat them, but that won't be a problem because they certainly can. Matthew/Bedlam taps into the boys' imaginations to find ways for them to defeat each other. He uses Robin's idea of how to take down Superboy, Kryptonite, Superboy's idea of how to take down Bart, making him completely still, and Impulse's imagination against Robin, a ninja, which Robin is sort of disappointed by. Still, Robin notices it's becoming difficult to think, and he encourages them all to think of nothing, to clear their minds, and it works, making all of the imaginings disappear. At least, that's how it appears at first. Bedlam is impressed with Robin's solution, but points out that Robin and Superboy were more successful in thinking of nothing than poor Bart, who has accidentally thought of everything. The Nazi dinosaur is back, there are killer clowns, it's all a mess, and Robin is less than impressed. It's very funny that when Matthew's explaining everything to them, he's like, "God, you're being such adults about this." Good gag. I'm such a sucker for any time a team is, like, unwillingly pitted against each other. Also, when a hero is, like, possessed and their allies have to find a way to take them down without seriously hurting or killing them, and they have to, like, balance the person being their friend with the necessity of stopping them. That is just really good stuff. I also think it's really sweet that Bart thought of, like, a ninja instead of, I don't know, a gun, which would probably kill Robin quite easily. I actually think Bart was probably thinking like, well, Robin is always fighting ninjas, so... My Bart ADHD agenda gets more evidence by the page. Being forced to be still is enough to take him down, and also literal torture for him. And then there's being unable to think of nothing. I asked my mom, who has ADD, and she said it'd be impossible for her to think of nothing. Maybe it's because I meditate semi-frequently, but I think I can do it pretty easily. But yeah, I really feel for Bart in this scene. The panel of him holding his head trying to be like, nothing, 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 is so sad. Like, he's trying so hard. Meanwhile, on Adult World, Batman appears and tells them that it's not a matter of waking Captain Marvel up, but of their belief. He wants to link their minds via Martian Manhunter and try to use their collective imaginations to influence the dream and force the two worlds back together. Wonder Woman wonders if this would really work, and Batman says it'll either work or inadvertently erase the adult world reality, causing everyone in it to cease to exist. Plastic Man wonders if he's joking, but Kyle assures him that Batman doesn't joke. Nice of you to show up, Bruce. Like, where was he? He's always just like, by the way, here's the solution to your problem. And it's like, where did you come from, bro? And it makes sense that Kyle would think Batman doesn't joke, but Kyle, if you read his solo runs, you'll find him to be quite funny in a dry, flat sort of way, I promise. It's Bedlam in Bedlam. Matthew is having a great time with the chaos, of course. Robin and Superboy are having a lot of trouble with everything in Bart's imagination. Bart tries to follow Max Mercury's advice and slow down and think. Robin and Superboy urge him to do something, and Superboy remarks that this isn't like one of Bart's video games. They only have one life each, which gives Bart the idea to reset everything. It works, causing Matthew to inadvertently make everything disappear. Bedlam tries to say it's no big deal, but Bart keeps resetting. Robin and Superboy keep the Bedlam entity occupied, while Bart matches wits with Matthew, who is quickly losing confidence. It's working. The entity is shrinking. Meanwhile, Robin is helping by verbally berating him. He says, "You're not a god, Bedlam. A god needs people to believe in him, and you don't even believe in yourself. You're just a kid who got some powers that weren't even yours to have, and the only thing those powers got you was trouble. But now you're tired of those powers and all that trouble and confusion, aren't you? And you just wish that everything was back to normal and that you could just go to sleep." While Robin's talking him down, the adults are evidently trying Batman's idea and slowly fade into the same space as the boys. It finally works, and the adults and kids are reunited, while Matthew and Bedlam are defeated. Yay, love a happy ending. Not quite there yet, but yeah, it's cool that Bart can use his and Matthew's shared interest in video games to trick Matthew into resetting, just like Matthew's been tricking them into imagining their weaknesses. Good thinking for Bart there. Robin doing his part by psychoanalyzing this kid, and okay, he starts off a little harsh, but I think his speech ultimately ends up in a place of empathy. Even if Robin is like actively trying to lead Matthew in the direction of his exhaustion, Tim is still correctly identifying that having all this power would tire him out, and that he does want everything to go back to normal. So great teamwork from the boys here, and I think it was a good decision for the JLA to execute Batman's idea off page. Like, we understand what they'll do and basically trust them to accomplish it. It's more important to focus on the boys and how they come to a resolution. I love how when the adults get there, they immediately know to let the kids finish what they're doing instead of trying to intervene. Like, they saw them doing something and were like, respect, well, wait a second. It's also great how Humberto Ramos and Mike McCone switch off literally from one panel to the next. As soon as the adults fully fade in, we're back to McCone style. Very cool stuff. Okay, last scene. We made it, everyone. Sometime later, it seems everyone has been debriefed. The DEO is unfortunately taking custody of Matthew, who is at this point catatonic. Max Mercury tells Impulse that he did a great job, and Bart thanks him, but asks if he's still grounded. Batman says that Oracle reports that everything is back to normal, and tells Robin that he and his friends did a great job. He says fine job, but great job is what he meant. He tells Robin to come on because it's a long drive back to Gotham. Superboy asks where Robin is going, and Robin just responds that he has to go. Batman stops them in the tunnel exit, though, and sincerely congratulates Tim once again, saying he's proud of him and that he'll see Tim back in Gotham, implicitly giving permission for Tim to spend more time in Happy Harbor with his friends. Robin comes back happily and says that he, Bart, and Superboy worked very well as a team, and they should be the Junior Justice League. Bart and Superboy are happy, but Superboy says that they have to work on the name. In the last panels, we see the abandoned body of Red Tornado, a spark in his eye. Guys, we did it! Oh my god, I am literally never doing 100 pages of comic in one podcast episode ever again. But okay, so it's really sweet that Bruce semi-successfully expresses an emotion here, and fully successfully recognizes that Tim's growing up, and he encourages him to find his identity outside of Batman, even though you can tell it's hard for Bruce. I can imagine, like, you mentor this kid and see him almost as an extension of yourself. Certainly Robin is an extension of of the Batman identity. And then he shows interest in doing hero work in other capacities, not just with you. I mean, I'm sure it's bittersweet for Bruce, and certainly difficult to not have him under his own supervision after what happened to Jason. I wonder if he would have let Tim do Young Justice at all if this thing with Bedlam hadn't forced them to be apart. Much to think about. It really sucks that the DEO is taking custody of Matthew. Like, he can't see his parents again? What the heck? I mean, I guess it makes sense if he's permanently bound to Bedlam, but I don't know why he would be. I don't know. I just want Matthew to go home. It really sucks, and I hope he's not catatonic forever. Oh, and also in the last panels, Superboy mentions talking to Wonder Woman and reminds them not to look at her eagle while she's talking to them, as in telling them not to stare at her chest. And Bart doesn't get it. This is a bit of a recurring thing, Bart not getting romantic or sexual things that the rest of Young Justice talk about or engage in. I support all interpretations of this. Bart being a late bloomer, being gay, being aromantic, asexual, etc. Love a Bart headcanon. He's such a good character to headcanon. And, of course, it's nice to see Red Tornado foreshadowing at the end here. Overall, I really love this story. It's an awesome prequel to Young Justice, and I think demonstrates everything important about the boys, both individually and as a team. I wish we could have seen more of the girls, but that's pretty much a general sentiment about Young Justice, so what can you do? To me, the art is really what makes this book, so definitely check it out for that, if nothing else. And I think that's everything. I hope you guys enjoyed this extra long episode of the pod. Sorry again that it was late. Next week we should be back on schedule and hopefully stick to it. The podcast should come out every Wednesday. I hope you guys had fun with me. Let me know what you thought in the comments or in an email. Make sure to follow the pod on Twitter, Tumblr, Instagram, or the RSS feed to never miss an episode. And of course, email any comments or questions to yjupodcast@gmail.com. All links will always be in the description or show notes below. Next week, we'll be back with the first issue of Young Justice. That's right, we're actually getting started on the premise of this podcast 4 episodes in. It'll be a great time, so make sure you tune in. Thank you for listening, and remember, it's not Young Justice, it's Young Just Us. Ciao, say goodbye. Ciao, ciao.